Okay, well, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming this evening, and I hope that this talk will be interesting to you, and I hope we can generate some good discussion from it as well. So I'm going to aim to talk for about 35 minutes. Really happy for you to ask questions in the Slack as we go. We can make this interactive, and also just really happy to hear your thoughts and feedback in the chat as we go as well. It can make it a bit more engaging for everyone if we have a bit of a chat. So I'm going to talk to you about how to make digital services more sustainable this evening. And, oh, gone through way too many at once. Right. My name is Hannah Smith. I live in the southwest of England. More specifically, I live in Exmoor in the county of Somerset. So Exmoor is a national park. It actually spreads across two counties, Devon and Somerset, and I'm in the Somerset side. And if you know the area at all, I live very near the town of Minehead. I've been a freelance developer for about the last 7 years, mainly working with WordPress. I sort of fell into working with WordPress because the community is really nice, the community is really engaging, and there's lots of work with WordPress as well. My background's in computer science, but I haven't always worked in as a dev. As I mentioned, I've been a dev for the last 7 years. And at the moment, I'm transitioning to do more work as a sustainable digital tech consultant as well. I'm co-founder of a meetup called Green Tech Southwest. So if you enjoy this topic and you're interested in learning more about it and meeting like-minded people, you'd be very welcome to attend. All our events are free, and there's always an online option to join in as well. I'm also working with the Green Web Foundation at the moment. So I've just completed a fellowship with the Green Web Foundation where we've been exploring climate justice and digital tech and how the two interrelate. And I have to be honest, before I started the fellowship, I had zero idea about how those two things interrelate. I'd say at the end of the fellowship, I have a bit more of an idea now. And some of those ideas are in tonight's presentation. And I'm also founder of a little campaign called Let's Green the Web, which I ran with the community climateaction.tech. So another great community, if you're interested in this kind of space, you're interested in connecting with people who are doing work in this space, I can't recommend climateaction.tech enough. And oh, Scott, glad to see you're from Taunton, born and bred. Nice. So that's a little bit about me. Let's talk about the talk. What am I going to talk about this evening? Sorry, I'm just trying to get the clicking right with my mouse because I've got one of these spaceships. This is not a normal mouse, it's a spaceship. So I'm just trying to figure out what the clicking does. So I am going to give you an overview of what sustainability is. I'm going to start from the beginning and make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about sustainability. I'm then going to talk a little bit about how digital technologies can be unsustainable. It would be really nice to have some audience participation at this point. When I did this talk in person last week, I actually at one point asked everybody in the room to stand up and then sit down if various things were happening. I might try that with everyone turning their cameras on, but I appreciate that maybe not all of you would want to be on the screen. So I'm going to just see how that works a little bit later. So you can keep your cameras off for now. Thank you. Thank you for those of you that have popped up. We'll have a go at that in about 6 or 7 minutes time, and we'll see if it works. Could be great, could be not great. Then I want to talk to you a little bit about a meaningful action you can take as a digital creator. So if you're responsible for creating digital, let's talk about what you can do to make things more sustainable. And assuming we've all got energy, we can spend a little bit of time talking about how to spot greenwashing as well in the sector. So basically, that's what this talk is. What it isn't. Can't give you a comprehensive masterclass on this topic in half an hour, 35 minutes. It's just too big. There's an awful lot for all of us to learn. I'm still learning as well. And sustainability is just really, really complex. There's a lot going on here. So really what I'm trying to do with tonight's talk is to give you some starting points. I want to get some conversations going, and I want to give you some food for thought on the topic, and hopefully, talk to you about some things that maybe you haven't thought about before, or maybe that you're only just starting to think about. So that's very much the plan. And the other thing I should say, this talk is not hating on digital tech, software, or the internet. I mean, given my day job as a WordPress developer, that would be like slightly self-defeating. I love tech. I think tech is fantastic. I think it has a lot of potential and does deliver a lot of great things to a lot of people. So generally I'm tech positive, but really the aim of the talk is to make sure that we're valuing tech a little bit more, and that we're really kind of appreciating what tech is and the cost of tech. So that's what we're going to kind of get into. So let's start off with talking about how we define sustainability then. So if you ask a lot of people what they think of as sustainability meaning, you'll probably hear this kind of definition, which is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Now, that was a definition that was produced in a report called the Brundtland Report, all the way from 1987. So people have been talking about sustainability for a long time, and I think maybe Rich recognized at the beginning of this talk that this is not new. We've been talking about it for a long time. I was born in 1983, and I remember learning about global warming at school. So the Brundtland Report came out in 1987, and that definition of meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs has been a definition that people have used for quite a while. I mean, it's a great definition, but it doesn't, there's a lot more to it. And so what I wanted to present to you tonight was a slightly more meaningful definition, a slightly more holistic definition. I'd like to present to you donut economics as a way of thinking about sustainability and a way of thinking about sustainability in tech. I'm just curious if I've got access to the comments there. I'd love to know if you've ever heard of donut economics before. Is this like, are you just sitting there going, oh my God, she's been in the sun too long. What on earth is she going on about? Or, does this phrase resonate with you at all? Have you heard of donut economics before?
No.
Okay, it's generally a no. Fantastic, yes. Lee, I am agreeing with you. You've not heard of it yourself, but you do like donuts. Me too. I love donuts. All right, fantastic. So this is going to be new to all of you, which is awesome. So the reason why I think donut economics has a real place in our conversations around sustainability is that it has a lot of really good analogies in it. And I'll explain to you where the donut comes into it. It's easily accessible. So there's loads of open source resources all about donut economics available to people, which I really, really like. It's a model that shows a holistic view of sustainability. It gives us the full picture, the full breadth of sustainability. And the other thing that I really love about this model is it puts humanity in the center of the story around sustainability, which humans are often not in the center of the story, and I think we really need to be. So donut economics was created by this amazing woman, Kate Raworth. She is an economist. She first published a report with these ideas in 2012 for Oxfam, where she was working at the time. And then in 2017, published this book, Donut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. I think Kate is an incredible thinker and an incredible communicator. I've got to be honest, I have one nitpick with this book. I have a nitpick with the title of this book, and it's more specifically the strapline. It says 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. And I would argue that this book gives us 7 ways to think like 21st century citizens or 21st century decision makers. I think this book is relevant to everyone. I think the concepts within it are relevant to everyone. So that would be my one nitpick, but otherwise everything else that Kate does is absolutely brilliant in my opinion. So what are we talking about here when we're talking about donor economics? What's this all about? So when sustainability is generally discussed, it comprises of 3 key pillars. And the Brundtland report, which I mentioned at the beginning, has these 3 key pillars in it, as does donor economics. And the 3 pillars are environmental concerns, which is what most people think sustainability is, social concerns, so thinking about how we as humanity behave, and economic and governance concerns, which is all around what we value and how we make decisions about things. So these 3 key pillars map beautifully onto a donut. Now I have to say, this is actually my favourite kind of donut. I'd love to know what your favourite kind of donut is in the chat if you're feeling like you want to share. But a simple sugary glazed donut, my absolute favourite. And thankfully it makes for a good layering of pictures over the top of it, so that's handy. So I mentioned to you that donor economics puts humanity at the centre of the model. And we could draw a circle in the centre of this donut to represent something called the social foundation. And the social foundation is made up of things that humanity needs to maintain a basic standard of living. Scott's just said, sorry, any free donuts are my favourite. Yes, good point. So sorry, the social foundation is made up of a set of things that make up humanity's basic human needs, so like food, water, shelter, but also things that allow us as humans to thrive. So things like education, things like access to the internet, things like peace and justice, things like political voice. So it's not just about meeting the needs for us to survive, it's about meeting the needs for us to thrive as humans as well, which I really love about this model. So we have the social foundation in the middle. We can draw a ring around the edge of the donut, and we can think of that as the ecological ceiling. Now, the ecological ceiling is a set of 9 things, which are ecological or environmental factors that pinned together make up the functioning of our planet. And they are things like climate change, ocean acidification, land conversion, things like chemical pollution. And the ecological ceiling is the set of things with which they're a boundary. The planet only has a finite amount of resources. We can't exceed that amount of resource use, and we are exceeding it at the moment. But there is a finite amount of stuff we can take from the planet and hope to leave enough for the people coming behind us. So we represent this as the outer ring of the donut. We represent this as the ecological ceiling. So the social foundation plus the ecological ceiling give us this lovely kind of donut shape. I mentioned to you my favourite kind of donut is a sugary glazed one. Some of you are saying free donuts or donuts with Nutella are your favourites. I like this because the sugary glaze gives a nice analogy here. We can think of the sugary glaze as that 3rd pillar, how we govern ourselves, the economics and decision making. It's on every single part of the donut. You can't escape it, and the donut is definitely not complete without it. And so all of these things together create this sweet spot in the centre of the donut in which all of humanity can thrive. So everybody is meeting the needs that they need to thrive, and we're not exceeding the outer limits of what the planet can provide for us. And so this, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this on the screen. I will publish these slides. In fact, maybe I've published them on Twitter already. I did a sort of a timed tweet. But a nice diagram. It sort of shows that the 9 ecological boundaries around the outside and the 12 social foundations in the middle. So you can get an idea of all the different things that we're talking about here. The key thing I really want to get across to you in this part of the talk is that when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about a very wide view of sustainability, which goes way, way, way beyond just thinking about carbon emissions. And what I'm seeing in the digital tech sector at the moment is that people talk about carbon emissions and decarbonisation being reducing our CO2 emissions and reliance on fossil fuels. I see the digital tech industry talking about decarbonisation as though it is sustainability. What I want to get across to everyone in this listening to this talk is that sustainability covers a much wider field than that. Okay. So how can digital be unsustainable then? So this is the part where I'm hoping for a little bit of audience participation. So as I mentioned, if I was in a physical room with you, I would ask you all to stand up, but we're doing this on Zoom. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you to turn your cameras on. So I've got a bit of a visual cue in front of me. So if you're willing to kind of get involved in a little bit of audience participation, now is the time to switch your cameras on, so I can see your lovely faces. All right, thank you to those of you that have switched your cameras on. Okay, so I'd like to ask you a question. I would like you to turn your camera off if you have never considered how the electricity used by digital tech is generated. So if you've never considered the electricity sources that are powering digital tech, I'd like you to turn your camera off. So what I'm basically asking you is, have you ever thought about using fossil fuel powered energy or renewable powered energy to power your tech? If you have thought about that, leave your camera on. If you've never given it a moment's thought, turn your camera off. All right, fantastic. Okay, you've all left your cameras on, woohoo, fantastic. So that suggests to me that there is people are thinking about this. When I did this talk at Pixel Pioneers, there were about 200 people in the room last week. And I think with the exception of one chap at the front who sat down, everybody stayed standing up for this. So it suggests to me that within us techies are thinking about electricity. So that's brilliant. Okay. The next question I have for you. So I'd like you to turn your camera off if, I'm assuming you've all got a mobile phone, if you have never considered the raw materials that go into the production of this phone, if you've never given that a moment's thought, what is in here and where does this stuff come from? I'd like you to turn your camera off, please. If you have got some awareness of this stuff, if you have thought about it before, please leave your camera switched on. All right, cool, fantastic. You've all left your cameras on, yay. Again, this is roughly what happened at Pixel Pioneers. I think we had at this point, maybe 10% of people sit down. We've got a much smaller sample of people here this evening. And it shows to me that, again, we are building an awareness within the digital tech community that our phones are responsible for an awful lot of ecological destruction. The rare raw materials that go into this phone have to come from somewhere. They have to be extracted from the planet. They are often extracted from places where we have marginalized communities. So we have lithium mines in Chile, we have cobalt mines in other parts of the world. And getting this stuff has a real cost and has a real impact on people's lives. It's just that we don't see it so much in the global north, but we're aware of it. So hurrah, okay, fantastic. Okay, I have my last question for you. Thank you for your participation so far. I would like you, please, to turn your camera off if you have never considered how much water data centers need to manage their cooling. So if you've never given any thought to how much water data centers need to manage their cooling, please turn off your camera. Okay. Fantastic. Scott, I'm really glad you left your camera on because you mentioned that you were you were hosting. So that's a relief for you. And Joel, I can see that you left your camera on as well. Fantastic. So what happened at Pixel Pioneers when I asked this question is, in about a room of 200 people, we had 7 people left standing by this point. And what I'm trying to get people to understand is that when we talk about digital tech being unsustainable, it goes way beyond the electricity being used to power our tech, our data centers, to actually run our machines, etc. We also have to think about where the raw materials are coming from, and there's also impacts on water as well. Thank you for the audience participation. You're all free to sort of turn your cameras back off now. Awesome. So I'm seeing the same patterns emerge now when I'm asking these questions to different groups, which is encouraging. Okay, fantastic. So I mentioned there that data centers can be responsible for using a lot of water for cooling. There are trends now for different types of cooling to happen, but we have kind of big issues when we've got data centers being built in the desert, say in Phoenix, Arizona, for example, where yes, there's lots of solar power to run the data center, but that water for cooling still has to come from somewhere. And data centers also gobble up land. And we are increasingly seeing issues with big tech forcing through contracts for them to use land for their data centers. There's a good example of a case happening in the Netherlands at the moment, where Facebook are pushing through a big data center, and the local community don't want it, and the local community want all the renewables that they've been putting online to be used for things that meet their social needs, their basic human needs. So there's a lot of politics and kind of bigger issues around data centers. And the reason why I bring this up is because the digital tech industry has done a magnificent job of convincing us all that tech is in the cloud and floats around, or that data centers rather are in the cloud and that they float around and they don't have a real impact. And sadly, they do have a real impact. So we have to think very carefully about what we're using these data centers for. Oh, and the other point just to make here is, you'll notice that I've talked about land and water in the social foundations area. And what I would like to get across to you at this point is that the social foundations and the ecological boundaries often overlap and cross over each other. And that's kind of part of the problem with sustainability as well, is it's very hard to compartmentalize things into neat little boxes, which is what our human brains like. It's a big network, a big web of interconnections and dependencies. And so it's important that we understand that. So sometimes something that might seem like an ecological issue probably has a big social impact as well. Moving on to the next point about social equity. Within the technology industry, we are increasingly seeing inequalities between the haves and have-nots. And what I mean by that is communities that are lucky enough to have digital technologies in their lives and that are lucky enough to have the benefits that digital technology brings. We have to have a huge amount of privilege to have digital technology. 60% of the world's population have access to the internet. That's 40% of the world's population that can't access the internet. I don't know about you, but the internet is in every single part of my day. I use it for all sorts of different things. So we need to remember that 40% of the world still don't have access to this stuff. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm conscious I've already been talking for 25 minutes, so I've got a lot more to tell you. So we have some ecological boundaries to think about as well. You all left your cameras on for the electricity production, so that shows to me that the conversation is being had and the awareness is being raised. That one of the most powerful things we can do in the tech industry is use energy that comes from renewable sources, such as sun and wind. And fossil fuels, we all know they're bad, right? I don't think we need to spend too long talking about that. And I did mention to you earlier about the Greenhouse Gangsters versus Climate Justice report. The fossil fuel industry is just as bad and toxic as the tobacco industry, apart from their impact is like 1,000 million times more magnified. The tobacco industry were responsible for killing individuals that chose to smoke. The fossil fuel industry is responsible for killing literally entire humanity, our entire way of life as we know it. So, don't ever give them a moment's grace and say they didn't know, or how were they to know? They knew what they were doing all along. So they don't ever deserve your grace or your kindness. And another ecological boundary, I already mentioned this, is around physical hardware and the rare raw materials that go into things like our phones, car batteries, electric bike batteries as well. So electrifying stuff is a good thing in many ways, but actually when you look at all of sustainability, we can't keep living the lives that we do and electrify everything. So if everyone switched their regular cars to electric cars, we're going to be in a different kind of mess than we are now. So we do have to think differently. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, this is a little side project I'm working on. It's called Doing the Donut.tech. You're welcome to take a poke around in there. Okay, I'm going to move on and just talk a little more about some of the statistics that we do know with regards to digital tech and climate change. So on this slide, it says, I've got two ridiculous acronyms on here for you, so I'm sorry about that. The first one, ICT, stands for Information Communications Technology. Honestly, it tends to be what academia will call digital tech. So I've got ICT creates between 2.1 and 3.9% of GHG emissions. GHG emissions stands for greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gases are made up of a number of different gases. CO2 is one of them, but methane, there's also a few others as well. But we like to simplify and measure things, right, as humans. And so one of the things that we've simplified greenhouse gases down to is CO2. But again, there's more to it than that. So ICT creating between 2.1 and 3.9% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. Putting that into context for you, if ICT was a country, it would be the 7th biggest polluter. That makes it bigger than aviation. So I thought I'd just explain to you very briefly how we can equate digital tech to CO2 emissions. Typically, when we're trying to measure the CO2 emissions of a digital service, we will do that through looking at the amount of data that we're transferring in order to load a page or load an application. And the way we do that is that we have some information that tells us that for every, let's say, megabyte of data that we send, we know that we can, using some averages and some, fair assumptions, we can figure out how much of a unit of energy that requires for us to use. So for 1 megabyte, we can say that that equates to a certain number of kilowatt hours, which is a unit of electricity. And then we know how many kilowatt hours, and then we know how many kilowatt hours, oh crikey, I've done it wrong again. Then we can convert kilowatt hours to CO2 emissions because we have a load of data called carbon intensity data. And so that allows us to very roughly equate data transfer to CO2 emissions. I mentioned I work for the Green Web Foundation. They have a really useful package called co2.js, which you can use, where a bunch of clever people have done the hard work, and you can use that package in order to estimate your services. And also at the end of all of these slides, I've added a whole bunch of other useful measurement tools as well. And I think they all use co2.js. So let's talk through a few actions that you can use to reduce your emissions. And again, I should actually write CO2 emissions on this slide. So you can reduce the amount of data being generated and sent, as I mentioned. So if you're a web developer like me, you can think about content and specifically look at media such as images and videos. You can also think about the amount of analytics that's being loaded on every single page as well. And also if you're bringing adverts in, all of those things can be reduced right down. Other ways of reducing data is by having good UX. I think maybe one or two of you here were designers or might be working in that kind of UX space. Helping people find what they're looking for makes us load less data, because if someone can find what they want straight away and they don't have to sort of click around 6 or 7 different pages, you've saved 6 or 7 different pages from being loaded unnecessarily. So search is your friend. Actually, a good search implementation will save a lot of energy over time. It's actually quite efficient to run searches. And we can also think about technical delivery here too. So if you're into sort of tool choice and framework choice, thinking about using the right framework or the right tool can really help you reduce data. I'm talking about things like caching, and I'm talking about serving static files where possible as well. That would be good. We can review what electricity sources you and your supply chain uses. So the Green Web Foundation is a great resource for that. We can also think about supporting the least powerful device. This is often overlooked within the tech industry, but actually backwards compatibility and progressive enhancement could mean that people hold on to their devices for longer. Between 80 and 90% of all the pollution that comes from this mobile phone comes from this mobile phone existing, not even being switched on and used once, just its manufacture, it existing. So one of the things that we can do to make digital tech more sustainable is help people hold on to their phones for longer, make them upgrade them less. That's a very powerful action that has a really big impact that we can do. And for those of you that are perhaps into back-end type stuff, there's a new emerging school of thought called green software development or sustainable software engineering. The Green Software Foundation, they've just had a big festival. I think that's just come to an end over the last 2 weeks. It's a global organisation, and they are very much at the forefront looking at standards and specifications for what it means to do sustainable software engineering. Sustainable software engineering is really about decarbonising things. So I maybe have a nitpick that it's not really truly sustainable, because we now know what sustainability in its broadest sense means. But essentially we can use data from the grid that tells us when we have times of lower carbon intensity. So for example, if the wind is blowing really strongly on a certain day or the sun is really shining, we'll have a lower carbon intensity because we'll have more renewables online and fewer fossil fuels. So we can schedule compute tasks to run at those times of lower carbon intensity. So for example, things that perhaps don't need to be done instantly and that could happen a little bit later, like analytics maybe, or certain back office processing tasks. So there's some stuff to think about there with sustainable software engineering. There's loads of books, loads of resources available on this stuff. So here's a slide with a few of those on. But I do have some slightly bad news for you. Many of us in this room are engineers or come from engineering backgrounds or work in engineering kind of roles. And we are trained to optimize things. But we can't optimize our way out of the climate crisis. We have to significantly change the way we're living. We have to significantly change what we value and what we're putting our resources and time and effort into. Now, it tickles me greatly that I have a quote from Elon Musk in this talk, because I'm not the biggest fan of Elon Musk. I don't think anybody should have that much wealth consolidated to one person. The inequality that brings is just mind-blowing. But, no doubt Elon Musk is a smart guy. He's got a lot of good things to say, and he does do a lot of good things. So I kind of put him in this talk as a kind of bit of a conversation starter, and I'd love to know in the comments what you think about Elon Musk, because I have pros and cons for him. But this quote is absolutely on point for this talk. He says, possibly the most common error of a smart engineer is to optimize a thing that should not exist. And I think within the world of sustainability and within the world of digital tech, there are lots of things that we work on that you might argue shouldn't exist. I do also find it quite ironic that Elon Musk said this and then he's got like SpaceX and stuff, but I mean, okay, maybe that's a conversation for the pub. So yeah, do tell me in the comments, you know, what your thoughts are on Elon Musk. I'd love to know what you're thinking. So as I mentioned, we can't optimize our way out of this. And the reason for that is something called Jevons paradox, or it's also known sometimes as the rebound effect. The more efficient we make something doesn't actually reduce its overall use. It just makes it easier for other people to use that thing. So we can't just optimize our tech, make it more performant, and hope to have an impact on sustainability. We have to ask ourselves bigger questions around what are we building digital for? Digital tech is generally an accelerator of solutions that could and should exist without digital. We put the digital layer over things to accelerate them. So when we're talking about digital tech sustainability, we have to ask ourselves, what solutions are we choosing to accelerate? And more importantly, for whom are we choosing to accelerate things for? And there's two resources I've left on this slide for you to have a look at. Design Justice Principles. I have this book here. I'm plowing my way through it at the moment. And also something called the Tarot Cards of Tech, which is a beautiful, beautiful website and really thought-provoking and massively worth having a look at. Okay, so I'm conscious I've been talking for a while. I'm going to just wrap up with a couple of practical steps and then come back to you all, hopefully for some conversation. I hope you're all still there. So in terms of asking ourselves these bigger questions, I think there's a lot of things we have to recognize about this. The first thing is that this is hard. The same thinking that has got us into this mess is not going to get us out of it. So if you find yourself in a digital tech sustainability conversation and you're finding yourself getting really, really uncomfortable, you're probably doing it right. We have to get uncomfortable to make changes here. So, and that is hard. And we talked a little bit about sort of mental well-being at the beginning of the talk. You know, it came up when you were introducing yourselves. Taking care of your mental well-being if you're working in this space is absolutely paramount. This stuff is hard, but it is work that has to be done. The other thing I mentioned here, practical step, is recognizing that sustainability and decarbonisation are not the same thing. And hopefully you've understood why through this talk. Another important thing for us to think about is that we can decarbonise things in an unsustainable way that abuses the social foundation. And we just keep repeating the same mistakes as of old. So we do have to look for some paradigm, some mindset shifts. We have to look for some different ways of doing things. And we also have to recognize that we are the right people to do this work. In the digital tech sector, we have exceptional levels of privilege. I mentioned to you, a lot of people don't even have access to the internet. We are the folks creating and building this stuff. We generally come from privileged backgrounds. We generally have good pay rates. We are the right people in the room to be tackling this. It can be our role. And the digital tech sector has a huge amount of influence on the world around us. People do listen to us. Whether they should or not, I don't know, but they do. So, you know, let's capitalize on that. Other practical steps, is be transparent about what you're learning and the journey that you're going on. Some of you mentioned when you introduced yourselves, you have some sort of director level roles or heads of departmental roles. I can't advise you strongly enough to be transparent about this stuff. Be transparent about your ecological and social policies as a team, as a company. Be transparent about your journey as an individual, your journey learning, your journey making mistakes, your journey discovering the things you're thinking about. It will help other people come along behind you. Be transparent about the companies involved in your supply chain as well. And be transparent about your ownership and shareholding. Okay. So I mentioned to you, if we had time at the end, we had a little bit of energy left, I would talk to you about greenwashing traps. So I think I've been talking for about 40 minutes. It's quite a long time. So this is going to be quick. If you are just optimizing your code and just optimizing your infrastructure, you cannot claim that you are sustainable. I've already explained why optimization isn't enough. And in fairness, you know, there's more to do than that. So I'm not saying this stuff isn't important. I'm not saying this stuff doesn't have value. It really does. But you can't just do this and claim that you're sustainable. For me, that's a bit greenwashy. If you are just planting trees or buying offsets, all you are doing is offloading your emissions, your problem, onto someone else. And we're way past the point of doing that. So in my opinion, that does not make you sustainable. If you start doing a supply chain analysis and you discover one of your key suppliers uses green energy, that doesn't make you sustainable by default. You've still got to put the hard work in. You've still got to put those policies and decision-making frameworks in place. And if you have a green team or a sustainability team and it's in the marketing division, I often worry about that. Marketing is an outward-facing function. Sustainability is very much an inward-facing function. It needs to be right at the heart of decision-making in the business. Okay, so summing up, you probably thought that I was going to give you a talk on the things on the left of this slide, or right, depends on which side, how this is being reflected. It's the efficient tech, using renewable energy and buying offsets. Most people think that that's actually what sustainability in the digital tech sector is. But actually it's far more complex than that, and it definitely involves more social programs such as diverse tech workforces, regenerative business models, slowing down and creating less, open source and distributing our work, decision-making that puts people at the center. So it's a lot more complex than that. This is Tom Greenwood. He's an awesome guy. He runs an agency called Wholegrain Digital. He's written a book called Sustainable Web Design. And I love this part at the end of his book. He pretty much signs his book off by saying, "We have nothing to lose." And he writes, "What if this book is a big hoax and the internet doesn't contribute to climate change at all? You'll have spent all this time reading about sustainable web design principles that help us create a faster, more accessible, more enjoyable, easier to use, and more resilient internet. Would that be so bad?" So I finished this talk with this thought for you. Making sustainable digital services is not a tool or a code problem. It actually requires us to human better. Thanks, folks. That's me done.